My name is Brandon Welch with ClicksCrazy.com, a Panama City Beach web design company, and today I just wanted to spend a few minutes and show you how we're going to make what's called a CSS Sprite. So obviously the web is all geared towards fast code, dynamic code. CSS is able to accomplish that. And what I have here is a Panama City Beach fishing charter called Baited and Hooked, and we actually did the design for the logo here as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to implement this custom design into WordPress. Okay, so it's not a template design, it's a fully custom design, but we're going to integrate it into WordPress, and for that we need to go ahead and write our own code and our own custom CSS. So what the first thing I'm going to do here is kind of look for elements that warrant CSS Sprite. Okay, so I'm going to look around and basically see what elements are going to be reused on every single page. Now obviously the background is going to be, which I've already taken care of that. Here is the page that I'm coding right now. You'll see I'm in the process of coding the HTML and CSS. So the first things that I initially see are probably going to be obviously the logo here. So I've got a new document over here on the right, and this is going to be the document for my CSS Sprite, and it'll be saved as its own Photoshop file so that I can refer back to it and go ahead and make changes. Now many people use programs to build their CSS Sprite. So what they'll do is they'll save each individual piece of the image, go to a website, use a program, and it'll put it all together for you. I don't like that method, and I'll tell you why. Because for expandability, and based on my experience from more corporate applications, you can't really control what might expand. So for example, I've just dragged the logo over here, and this will be the first element of my CSS Sprite. Okay. Then I'm going to go down here to my Facebook and Twitter logos, and I'm going to put those over here. Now had I used a program to do this, I might not be able to actually plan for the future. For example, right now they have Facebook and Twitter, but I know for a fact that they want to add LinkedIn, they might add Manta, they might add Yelp, and they might add more. So I want to make sure that I leave space for those logos. When you use a generator, a CSS Sprite generator, you generally can't control anything about that. Okay? So now I'm going to have my Facebook and Twitter icons here. I think I want to grab this little fish here because we might use that in different elements of the display and so forth. Okay, so let me see if there's anything else. And this is a pretty clean-cut design where most of the design is blocked off by the copy, so I don't see too much else here that I want to use in my sprite. But I do want to add a hover over effect to this logo. Now I've actually got my layers over here in another window just to keep the space clean here, so I'm just going to throw that back. But if you're experienced with Photoshop, you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to go ahead and duplicate this logo. I'm going to throw it over here. So again, the CSS Sprite will allow me, instead of having to have two different images for a hover over effect, I can just change the background position of the logo A tag, and of course I can get my hovered over version of the logo. So what do I want to change about here? Now I might change this later, but let's just change the overall color. And let's change it to just a teal for now. Or actually maybe let's grab this darker green. There we go. Okay, so there's my hover over effect. All right, so let me just double check and make sure there's nothing else here that I want to add in my sprite. All this is text based. You know, these images are one-offs, they're only going to be on this page. Even though this might look like it could be an image, this call to action for the phone number and to book here, we're actually going to leave that alone because we can actually accomplish that with custom fonts and font sizes. So I think we're good. So now what I want to do is kind of look at my sprite here. Let's put it in the forefront and basically see, okay, how is this going to expand? Well, the logo is probably not going to change, but you know, might as well leave a little space over here in case I want to eventually make the logos a little bit larger. This I'll kind of just view as an icon, and maybe this row here I'll just reserve for future little icons that we might come up with. Okay, and then my Facebook and Twitter. Okay, let's kind of shrink the space here. I don't envision these getting any bigger, but I'll leave the rest of this line and maybe another line down here for future expansion. Okay, so this is a very, very simple sprite. So now I'm going to go ahead and trim this up so that it uses as little space as possible, so it renders as quickly as possible. Let me go ahead and save this. I'm going to call it our global sprite. Okay, so there we go. Now let's go ahead and make sure we got it in the code. Save it as a PNG. Okay, now I'm just saving it in our root directory right now because, again, this will be implemented into WordPress. I always typically call it global sprite, so we know that it's a global element that's going to be used across the board. Okay, now I'm going to jump back into my code here, and I'm using Aptana IDE. Okay, so here's just a template that I've used before. I have a class, a CSS class that I call global. So any element that I want to use the global sprite on, as opposed to having to redeclare and call this image over and over and over again, I simply call the class on any element that I want to use this global sprite on. Okay, so this directory is incorrect, so let me fix that because it's in the root directory. Okay, now let's pick an element that we want to use our global sprite on. Okay, well, let's start with the logo first. Okay, so let me go down in my code here. All right, there's my logo. That's what it's going to be. That'll go to okay. Now you see I've got my class global, so this is going to use the CSS Sprite. Well, if I pull up the page, that A tag doesn't have anything on it. You can actually see my cursor turn into a hand where the A tag actually is, but we basically need to go ahead and style it, even though it's calling the background already. So I'm going to roughly get the size here. So 212 pixels by 95. So let's style this. I already have the ID called here in CSS, so I just need to style it. So let's do 212, and what was that, 95. Okay, let's just leave out this margin stuff for now. This is an A tag, so we need to make it block. Okay. Now you see my background position is 0, 0 here. Okay, let's just see what happens when we refresh this. Okay, nothing happens, so let's take a look and see why. Okay, our image is not loading, and you probably caught that. I had the name wrong. Okay. So there's our image. Okay, now you see when I hover over it, if you look on my screen, you'll see my inspector change to hover. On the lower right, it says logo : hover, background position -38. Well, that's incorrect. Okay, so we just need to fix that. So here's my hover position. Now you notice -38 is moving it down. So let's set that back to 0 because remember I had my sprite hover over effect over here to the right. Alright, so let's change it to, I know it's about 212 pixels wide, so let's change it over here to -212. It won't be perfect, I'm sure, but at least it'll give you an idea. Alright, so there you go. So I know that there are many details that maybe we didn't cover, but that gives you an overview of what a CSS Sprite is. So the benefits are we don't have to call the images so many times on the page. Instead, we have this one class global that we can use over and over again on any element. So when I add down here, when I add my little fish icon, I'm just going to call class global again. And then, of course, on that individual element, I'll customize it and change the background position. So this is an example of a very small sprite. You know, typically there's quite a bit more different elements on here, and this one will grow too. But the idea of doing it custom yourself is to make it expandable. so that it can grow with the website. Don't use generating tools and things like that. Well, that'll conclude this session by clickscrazy.com on CSS Sprites. You can leave some comments below. Let us know what you think. Thanks.